The harsh autumn wind whipped dust across the lonesome street of Redemption Creek, and Abigail Zimmerman clutched a threadbare shawl around her shoulders. Her body trembled, but not just from the cold. The year was 1876. She'd just buried her father, the last piece of her family, and he'd left her with nothing. Nothing but his debts, and a hunger so deep it felt like a living thing clawing at her insides. The sun bled out across the sky, casting long skeletal shadows over the Colorado mining town. Abigail stood before the Golden Nugget Saloon, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew what she had to do. She had one thing left to sell: herself. She took a shaky breath, steadying her hand against a rough wooden post. At 22, with an education from back east, she'd never imagined this. Selling her body to survive one more winter. Her father's mining claim had been a fool's dream, a deep hole in the ground that swallowed every dollar and every last bit of hope. Now the bank was taking the cabin. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The saloon doors swung open, spilling yellow light and the sound of coarse laughter onto the street. Abigail flinched, but she didn't run. A man stumbled out, his drunk eyes landing on her instantly. "Well now, ain't you a pretty little thing?" he slurred, reaching a grimy hand toward her face. She jerked back, her resolve cracking. "I'm looking for work," she managed, her voice a dry whisper. The man's lips peeled back from tobacco-stained teeth. "I bet you are, sweetheart. Come on in." He gestured with his head. "Madame Ruby's always looking for fresh faces." Her legs felt like they might give out as she followed him through the doors. The saloon was a wall of smoke and noise. The clink of glasses, the plink of a cheap piano, the roar of men's voices. Women in gaudy dresses draped themselves over miners at card tables, their laughter too loud, too sharp. "Ruby!" the man bellowed. "Got a new girl for you!" A woman with a mountain of flaming red hair turned from the bar. Her face was caked in white powder, but it couldn't hide the hard years etched around her eyes. She sized Abigail up with a cool, calculating stare that missed nothing. "What's your name, girl?" Her voice was raspy, worn down by smoke and whiskey. "Abigail Zimmerman, madam." Ruby circled her like a vulture. "A bit thin, but you got a clean, pretty face. Could do well upstairs." She reached out, her fingers brushing against Abigail's hair. "Why you here?" Abigail swallowed the lump of pride in her throat. "My father just died. The bank is taking our home. I need money." For a split second, something in Ruby's expression softened. "First time." Abigail could only nod, shame burning hot on her cheeks. "Well, we all start somewhere," Ruby said, her voice all business again. "Tonight, you can serve drinks. We'll see how you handle the customers. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the other work." A strange mix of relief and dread washed over Abigail as she was handed a stained apron. At least she'd eat tonight. That was something. It had to be. The evening was a nightmare. A blur of leering eyes and hands that strayed too far. Abigail moved through the haze, her own hands trembling as she delivered drinks, trying to dodge the men who got too persistent. Then, a burly miner with a tangled beard grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron. He tried to pull her onto his lap. "Let go, please," she begged, panic seizing her throat. "Come on, darling. Just a little kiss," he growled, his grip tightening, bruising her skin. Suddenly, the miner's hand was ripped away from her. A tall figure stepped between them, his broad shoulders a solid wall. "The lady said no," a deep, steady voice commanded. The miner scowled, rubbing his wrist. "Mind your own business, York. Was just being friendly." "Your kind of friendly isn't welcome here," the man replied. His voice was calm, but it held a core of steel that promised violence. The miner mumbled a curse and shuffled back to his table. Defeated. Abigail looked up at the man who had saved her. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. A Stetson hat was pushed back on his head, and a silver star gleamed on his vest. The law. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. He gave a single sharp nod. "Lucas York, town sheriff. You new here?" "Yes, I'm Abigail Zimmerman." A flicker of something crossed his face. Recognition. Joseph Zimmerman's daughter. She nodded, a fresh wave of grief and surprise hitting her. "You knew my father?" "He was a good man," Sheriff York said, his voice softening. "I was sorry to hear of his passing." His gaze was intense, seeming to see right through her. "You shouldn't be working in a place like this, Miss Zimmerman." Tears pricked her eyes. "I have nowhere else to go." Before he could say more, Madame Ruby materialized at her elbow, a fake smile plastered on her face. "Sheriff, always a pleasure, but my girls have work to do." Lucas York's jaw tightened into a hard line. "She's not one of your girls, Ruby." Ruby's smile was thin as a razor's edge. "Not yet, perhaps, but times are hard. A pretty girl's got to eat." She turned to Abigail, dismissing the sheriff entirely. "Speaking of which, your shift is done. Here's your pay." Ruby pressed a few coins into her palm. It was barely enough for a room and a meal. Abigail clutched the money, the metal cool against her sweaty skin. As Ruby sashayed away, Sheriff York leaned in close, his voice low. "Come by my office tomorrow morning. I might know of some more suitable work." He didn't wait for an answer. He just tipped his hat and walked out, leaving Abigail standing in the middle of the chaos, more confused than ever. Who was this man, and why did he care what happened to the daughter of a failed miner? Abigail fled the saloon and found a room at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. The landlady shot a disapproving look at her clothes, which reeked of cheap whiskey and smoke. In the small, cold room, Abigail counted the coins again. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Ruby's words echoed in her mind. "Tomorrow we'll talk about the other work." The thought made her sick. But the gnawing hunger in her belly was a terrifying alternative. She fell into a fitful sleep, her dreams filled with her father's disappointed face. Morning came too quickly. Abigail washed her face in a basin of icy water and put on her last clean dress, a faded blue cotton that had belonged to her mother. It hung loosely on her thin frame. The sheriff's office was a small, plain building on the main street. She stood outside for a long time, her hand hovering over the weathered wood of the door, before she finally found the courage to knock. "Enter," called the deep voice she remembered. Sheriff Lucas York sat behind a desk piled high with papers. He stood as she walked in, respectfully removing his hat. His sky-blue eyes seemed to miss nothing. "Miss Zimmerman, I'm glad you came. You said you might know of some work," she began, a fragile hope flickering inside her. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Please sit." He waited until she did before he continued. "I knew your father well. He often spoke of you. He was proud you were educated back east." "My mother's sister paid for my schooling in Boston," she explained. "I came back when she passed away 3 years ago." "He mentioned you were a teacher there." "An assistant teacher," she corrected, "for young children." A genuine smile transformed his serious face. "Perfect. Our school teacher, Miss Holloway, is expecting a child. She has to return to her family back east. The town council has been looking for a replacement." Abigail's heart gave a painful lurch. A teacher? Here? It was impossible. It was everything she'd ever wanted. "It doesn't pay much," he warned, his smile fading. "But it comes with living quarters above the schoolhouse, and it's certainly more respectable than—" He trailed off, his expression grim. "Than selling myself," Abigail finished for him, her voice blunt. Lucas met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. A woman like you shouldn't have to make choices like that. You're meant to be cherished, not traded. Something in his voice, in his intense stare, made her breath catch. She had to look away, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in a very long time. "The position is yours, if you want it," he said, his voice softer now. "School starts next Monday." "Yes," she breathed, the word a prayer. "Yes, I accept. Thank you, Sheriff York." "Lucas," he corrected gently, "and you're welcome, Miss Zimmerman." "Abigail," she offered in return. He nodded slowly. "Abigail." The way he said her name made it sound like something precious, something he'd been holding on to for a long time. But as he looked down at the papers on his desk, she saw his hand brush against a small, leather-bound journal. And on its cover, she could just make out the initials, JZ. It was her father's journal. What was it doing on the sheriff's desk? Over the next few days, Lucas helped her move her meager belongings into the apartment above the schoolhouse. It wasn't much: a bed, a stove, a small table. But to Abigail, it was a palace. It was a future. "It's not much," Lucas said, setting down her one small trunk. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She ran a hand over a dusty bookshelf filled with worn schoolbooks. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything." He shifted, looking awkward with his hat in his hands. "I'll introduce you to the town council tomorrow. Just a formality." The meeting with the council was tense. Most of the men were polite, but a few looked at her with open suspicion. They'd seen her at the Golden Nugget. They knew where she'd been headed. One of them, a stern-faced man named Blackwood, made a pointed comment. "Seems an odd choice, Sheriff. A woman from a saloon teaching our children." Lucas's voice was firm, cutting through the tension. "Miss Zimmerman was educated in Boston and has teaching experience. She fell on hard times, which can happen to any of us. Her father was a respected man in this town." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the councilman. "She has my full support." His unwavering defense silenced any more objections. Abigail was officially the new schoolteacher. But Blackwood's distrust lingered in the air, a sour note in her newfound hope. She threw herself into preparing the schoolhouse, cleaning and organizing, desperate to prove herself. Lucas stopped by every day. He brought her a jar of honey, a bouquet of wildflowers, a new slate for her desk. Each small gift felt like a promise. On Sunday evening, the night before her first day, he appeared at her door with a covered basket. "Figured you'd be too busy to eat," he said. "Mrs. Barnes from the cafe packed you some supper." "Would you join me?" she asked, touched by his constant thoughtfulness. They ate at her small table, the lantern light casting a warm glow. For the first time since her father's death, Abigail felt a sense of peace. Lucas told her stories about the town, making her laugh. "Why are you being so kind to me, Lucas?" she asked, the question that had been nagging at her finally spilling out. He put down his fork, his expression turning serious. "Your father, he saved my life once, years ago when I first came to these parts. I was young, reckless, got caught in a flash flood down by the creek. He pulled me out, took me in, no questions asked." He paused. "I owed him a debt." It sounded so simple, so noble, but it didn't explain her father's journal. "But it's more than that, Abigail," he continued, his voice low. "You remind me that there's still goodness in this world, even in a place like this." The intensity in his eyes made her heart flutter. "I was ready to give up that goodness," she admitted quietly. "You were surviving," he said firmly. "There's no shame in that. But now, you can live." The next morning, Abigail stood before 23 eager, curious faces. They were the children of Redemption Creek, and they were her responsibility. By the end of the day, she was exhausted, but exhilarated. She had found her purpose again. As the children filed out, she saw Lucas leaning against a tree in the schoolyard, a small smile on his face. He'd been waiting for her. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. The town slowly began to accept her. The women would nod at her in the street, and she was invited to the church socials. Lucas was a constant, steady presence by her side. He courted her openly, taking her for rides to see the aspen trees turn to gold in the mountains, bringing her books from his own collection, planting rose bushes by her door. She found herself falling for the quiet, thoughtful sheriff who seemed determined to protect her from the world. One crisp October afternoon, they rode out for a picnic in a meadow overlooking the valley. As they ate, she watched him whittle a piece of wood, a habit he had when he was thinking. "What brought you here, Lucas?" she asked. "To Redemption Creek." He stared out at the mountains. "Running from my past, I suppose. My father was a big-time rancher in Texas, expected me to follow in his footsteps, but we never saw eye to eye." He hesitated. "After the war, I couldn't go back to that life." "You fought in the war." She hadn't known. He nodded, a shadow passing over his face. "Confederate side, not by choice. I was drafted, saw things. Things a man should never have to see." He fell silent for a long moment. "Afterward, I just drifted. That's when I met your father. Something about this place. It felt like a new start. Are you still in touch with your family?" He shook his head. "Parents are gone. Got a younger brother out in California somewhere. We don't talk much." He looked at her then, his blue eyes searching hers. "You're alone too." "Not anymore," she said softly. The air grew thick with unspoken words. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Her breath hitched. Just then, a roll of distant thunder broke the spell. Dark clouds were massing on the horizon. "We should head back," he said, his voice rough. They raced the storm, laughing as they ran for the schoolhouse, just as the first drops of rain began to fall. They stood inside, dripping and breathless. He helped her with her wet shawl, his hands lingering on her shoulders. "I should go," he said, but he made no move to leave. "Stay," she whispered. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Abigail," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm falling in love with you. I think I have been since that first night I saw you in the saloon." She didn't answer with words. She stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her tight against him. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly, Abigail Zimmerman," he murmured. "If you'll have me." "Yes," she breathed. "Oh, yes." But that night, after he'd gone, she couldn't sleep. She pulled out the few belongings she had from her father. Tucked inside an old book, she found it. A folded, yellowed piece of paper. It was a letter, in her father's handwriting, but it had never been sent. It was addressed to a lawyer in Denver. It spoke of a partnership gone sour. It spoke of betrayal. And it spoke of a man named Lucas. "He's not who he says he is," her father had written. "He has a darkness in him. If anything happens to me, you must investigate Sheriff York." The courtship that followed was a strange mix of happiness and dread for Abigail. Every kind word from Lucas, every gentle touch, was a balm to her soul. But her father's words were a poison in her mind. She tried to push them away. Lucas was a good man. He was the town's hero. Her father must have been mistaken, or perhaps he was talking about a different Lucas. It wasn't possible that this man, the man who looked at her with such open adoration, could be dangerous. But not everyone in town was so charmed. Ruby, the saloon madam, watched them with narrowed eyes. She started spreading rumors, not just about Abigail, but about the sheriff. Whispers that Joseph Zimmerman's death in a mine collapse hadn't been an accident. Whispers that the sheriff had been the last one to see him alive. Lucas ignored the gossip, his devotion to Abigail never wavering. He publicly defended her honor and his own, making it clear to the whole town that she was the woman he intended to marry. As November arrived, bringing the first snow, Abigail threw herself into planning the school's Christmas pageant. Lucas was there every evening, helping her build the stage and paint the scenery. One night, as they worked late in the empty schoolroom, he grew quiet. "What is it?" she asked. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Got a telegram. Trouble out at the silver mine. The owners brought in hired guns to break up a workers' strike. It's gonna get ugly." "That sounds dangerous." "It is," he said, his face grim. "I have to ride out there tomorrow. Try to keep the peace before men start getting killed." He took her hand, his grip tight. "I'll miss you." "Be careful, Lucas," she whispered, a cold fear creeping into her heart. He left the next morning. The days that followed were an agony of waiting. A brutal snowstorm hit, blanketing the entire region and cutting Redemption Creek off from the outside world. Abigail dismissed her students early, her mind constantly on Lucas, trapped somewhere out in that blizzard. That night the wind howled like a banshee. Sometime after midnight, there was a frantic pounding on her door. Her heart leapt. "Lucas." But when she threw the door open, it wasn't him. It was a young miner, his face bruised and bloody, his eyes wide with panic. "Miss Zimmerman, I'm Sam Whitaker, the sheriff. He sent me." The boy gasped for breath. "There was a fight at the mine. Gunfire. Men are hurt. The sheriff, he's been shot." Abigail's blood turned to ice. "How bad is he?" "Took a bullet to the shoulder. He's bleeding bad. The company doctor won't help us, and we can't get the town doc through this storm." Sam's voice cracked. "The sheriff, he said you might be able to help. Said you had medical knowledge." She'd assisted a doctor in Boston. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. "Let me get my things," she said, her voice steady despite the terror ripping through her. The ride to the mining camp was a frozen hell. She clung to Sam as his horse struggled through the deep snow, the wind cutting like a knife. The camp was a chaotic scene of shouting men and makeshift tents. Sam led her to one where the injured lay on pallets. Lucas was there, his face pale as death, his shirt soaked in blood. His eyes fluttered open when she entered. "Abigail, you shouldn't be here," he rasped. "Hush," she said, already kneeling beside him, tearing away the bloody fabric to examine the wound. "I'm exactly where I need to be." For 3 days, she worked without rest, cleaning wounds, setting bones, and fighting to keep the fever from claiming Lucas. The bullet had passed clean through, but he'd lost so much blood. She sat by his side, spooning broth into his mouth, bathing his hot forehead, willing him to live. On the 3rd night, his fever finally broke. She was dozing in a chair next to his cot when she felt his hand weakly take hers. "Angel," he whispered. Her eyes flew open. "Lucas, how do you feel?" A weak smile touched his lips. "Like I got trampled by a herd of buffalo." He squeezed her hand. "You saved my life." "You would have done the same for me," she said, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. His eyes, though clouded with pain, were clear and intense. "Marry me, Abigail," he said, his voice suddenly strong. She blinked, sure she was hearing things. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "Life's too short. I love you, Abigail Zimmerman. I want to spend whatever time I have left with you." Tears streamed down her face. "You're delirious." He shook his head. Never been more clear-headed in my life. Say yes, Abigail, please. She looked at the man who had rescued her, who had given her a new life, the man her father had warned her about. And in that moment, none of the doubts mattered, only the love she felt for him. Yes, she whispered, laughing through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. He sighed in relief and closed his eyes. As he drifted off to sleep, his coat, which she'd hung up to dry, slipped from its peg and fell to the floor. A small silver locket spilled from the pocket. Curiosity got the better of her. She picked it up. It was intricately carved, clearly expensive. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp. She opened it. Inside there was a tiny, beautifully painted portrait. It was a woman with dark, soulful eyes and raven hair, and beneath the portrait a single initial was engraved. C. It wasn't his mother. It wasn't her. Who was C? They returned to Redemption Creek as heroes. Lucas, weak but alive, with his arm in a sling. Abigail, the brave schoolteacher who had faced down a blizzard and saved the sheriff's life. The town's attitude toward her changed overnight. The whispers stopped. People greeted her with smiles and gifts. They had won. But as Abigail helped nurse Lucas back to health, the image of the woman in the locket haunted her. She didn't mention it. She was afraid of the answer. She told herself it was part of the past he was running from, a past that didn't matter anymore. The Christmas pageant was a huge success. Afterward, the whole town celebrated. Lucas pulled her outside into the softly falling snow. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate gold ring, a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was my mother's, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I want you to have it. It was beautiful. As he slipped it on her finger, she felt a pang of guilt. She was accepting his mother's ring, while the locket with the strange woman's picture was tucked away in her own drawer, a secret between them. A week before their wedding, a stranger rode into town. He was tall and lean, with the same sky-blue eyes as Lucas, but his face was harder, his mouth set in a permanent sneer. He strode into the sheriff's office without knocking. Abigail was there, tidying up. The man stopped and looked from her to Lucas, who had gone pale. Well, brother, the stranger said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, you've done well for yourself. A nice, quiet town, a respectable job, a pretty little fiancée. He let his eyes roam over Abigail in a way that made her skin crawl. Does she know who you really are? Does she know your real name isn't York? Lucas stood up slowly, his hand resting near his gun. Caleb, what are you doing here? Caleb? Abigail asked, looking between the two men. My younger brother, Lucas said through gritted teeth. Caleb laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Oh, I'm here for what's mine, Lucas. Or should I say, Lucas Thorne. I'm here for the family inheritance you stole when you ran from Texas. He turned his venomous gaze on Abigail. Ask him about the man he killed. Ask him about Catherine. Ask him why there's $1,000 bounty on his head. The world tilted under Abigail's feet. Lucas Thorne, a murderer, a thief. The name from the locket echoed in her mind. See Catherine. Everything her father had written, every rumor Ruby had spread, it all came crashing down on her. The man she loved, the town's hero, was a complete fraud, and she had agreed to marry him. Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. Caleb, Lucas's brother. He looked at Lucas with pure hatred. Tell her, brother. Tell your blushing bride how you shot Catherine's fiancé in a duel and fled with our father's money. Tell her how you left me to deal with the fallout, the bounty hunters, the shame. Lucas's face was a mask of stone. That's not how it happened, Caleb, and you know it. He turned to Abigail, his eyes pleading. Abigail, let me explain. Explain what? She whispered, her voice trembling. That your name is a lie? That you're a wanted man? My name is Lucas Thorne, he admitted, his voice low. I did kill a man in a duel, but it was a fair fight. He challenged me. And Catherine, she was my fiancée. Her brother, the man I killed, was a violent drunk who wouldn't accept our engagement. I never stole any money. I took my share of the inheritance, what our father left me. Lies, Caleb spat. He left you nothing. You were disowned. The office door swung open, and Councilman Blackwood walked in, flanked by 2 armed men. His face was grim. Sheriff Thorne, it seems we have a problem. Caleb here has provided us with a wanted poster from Texas, a bounty for murder. Lucas's hand went to his gun, but Blackwood shook his head. Don't. You're outnumbered. Hand over your badge and your weapon. You're under arrest. Abigail watched in horror as they disarmed Lucas and led him to the town jail. The man who had saved her, who had been her rock, was now a prisoner. The whole town was in an uproar. Caleb spent the rest of the day in the saloon, buying drinks for everyone, painting Lucas as a villain and a fugitive. That night, Abigail couldn't stay away. She went to the jail. Lucas was sitting on the edge of the cot, his head in his hands. Is it true? She asked through the bars. All of it? He looked up, his face etched with pain. Most of it. I changed my name to start over. I never wanted that life to follow me here. Your father, Joseph, he knew. He was the only one. He helped me. He believed in me. My father's letter, she said, the words catching in her throat. He wrote to a lawyer. He said you weren't who you claimed to be. He was trying to protect me, Lucas insisted. The family of the man I killed is powerful. They have long arms. Joseph was afraid they'd find me. He was creating a paper trail to throw them off, to make it look like he was suspicious of me. It was a story that almost made sense. But could she believe him? Could she trust a man who had lied about his entire identity? And Catherine, she asked, her voice barely audible. The woman in the locket. Pain flashed in his eyes. I loved her, but after the duel, after I killed her brother, she couldn't look at me the same way. She broke our engagement. The locket is all I have left of her. He stood up and came to the bars, his fingers reaching through to touch her cheek. But I love you, Abigail. What I feel for you is real. None of that was a lie. Her heart ached. She wanted to believe him, but the evidence was overwhelming. The next day, Caleb made his move. He filed a claim on Joseph Zimmerman's old mine, the same mine that had supposedly been worthless. He told the town council he had new information that suggested there was a rich vein of silver deep inside. And he had a partner, Councilman Blackwood. It all clicked into place. This wasn't just about an old family feud. This was about greed. Abigail remembered something Sam, the young miner, had told her at the camp. He'd said the gunfight started because the owners' hired thugs were trying to run them off a specific section of the claim, a section that bordered her father's land. She went to find Sam. He confirmed her suspicions. They were trying to keep us away from the North Ridge, he said. Right where it meets the old Zimmerman claim. It didn't make sense. It made perfect sense now. Caleb and Blackwood knew there was silver. Her father must have found it just before he died. They needed Lucas out of the way to seize the land. But was it just about the land? Or was it about what happened to her father? She went back to her father's journal, the one Lucas had. She read it cover to cover. It was mostly records of digging, of debts, of despair. But in the final entry, dated the day before his death, he wrote, Caleb Thorne arrived today. Lucas's brother, a snake in the grass. He offered to buy me out, said he knew there was silver. I refused. I don't trust him. I fear he may do something desperate. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't an accident. Her father had been murdered. Abigail ran to the jail. the journal clutched in her hand. She showed the entry to Lucas. His face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Caleb," he breathed. "He killed your father. And he shot you," she realized. "At the mine. It wasn't a random stray bullet during the fight. He tried to kill you too." "We have to stop him," Lucas said, gripping the bars. "Abigail, you have to get me out of here." There was no time to convince the town. Caleb and Blackwood were moving too fast. That night, Abigail baked a small cake and brought it to the deputy watching the jail. Inside the cake was a key she had stolen from the hook in the office. While the deputy was distracted, Lucas unlocked his cell. He took the deputy's gun and tied him up. "Go to the mining camp," he told Abigail. "Find Sam. Tell him everything. Tell him Caleb Thorne murdered your father for his claim. The miners are good men. They'll help." "What are you going to do?" she cried. "I'm going to find my brother," he said, his voice deadly calm. "And I'm going to get a confession." Lucas tracked Caleb to the Zimmerman mine. He found him and Blackwood there with a crew of hired guns, already starting to blast into the rock face. "It's over, Caleb," Lucas said, stepping out from the shadows, his gun leveled. Caleb just laughed. "You against all of us, brother. You always were a fool." He gave a signal, and his men raised their rifles. Lucas was trapped. But just as Caleb gave the order to fire, a shout echoed from the ridge above. It was Abigail. And behind her stood Sam and 20 armed miners, their faces grim, their rifles aimed down at Caleb's men. "He killed Joseph Zimmerman," Sam yelled. "He's a claim jumper and a murderer." The standoff was broken. Gunfire erupted. Lucas used the chaos to dive for cover, returning fire. The miners provided cover from above, their shots accurate and deadly. Blackwood, the coward, tried to run and was brought down by a shot from Sam. Lucas fought his way toward his brother, who was scrambling to get away. He cornered him against a rock wall. "You killed him," Lucas snarled. "You killed an innocent man for a hole in the ground." "He was in my way," Caleb screamed, pulling a hidden derringer. He fired, but Lucas was faster. A single shot from Lucas's pistol sent Caleb staggering back, clutching his chest. He collapsed to the ground, his eyes wide with shock. It was over. The miners helped round up the remaining hired guns. When they returned to town, the truth came out. The bound deputy confirmed Abigail's story. Her father's journal was the final proof. Lucas Thorne was cleared of all charges, his name restored. He was no longer a fugitive, but the hero who had brought his own brother to justice. A week later, on New Year's Day, they were married in the small-town church. The whole town was there. Abigail wore a simple cream dress, and Lucas stood tall and proud beside her. He was Lucas York again. He decided to keep the name. "Lucas Thorne died in Texas," he'd told her. "Lucas York is the man who loves you." As they said their vows, Abigail knew she had finally found her home. This man, with his complicated past and his unwavering heart, was her future. Their kiss sealed a promise born from hardship and betrayal, forged in fire and truth. That night, in the small house that was now their home, he swept her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. York." She looked up at him, her heart overflowing. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she whispered. They decided to leave the past behind. Lucas resigned as sheriff, and they bought a small ranch outside of town, the one her father's mine claim had finally paid for. They built a life, piece by piece. They had children, a daughter with his blue eyes, and 2 sons. The ranch prospered. The town grew. Redemption Creek had lived up to its name. Years later, an old woman now, Abigail would sit on her porch, watching her grandchildren play in the yard, and she would think back to that desperate, hungry girl standing outside the Golden Nugget Saloon. She'd think of the dark path she almost took, and the unexpected hero who had pulled her into the light. Her life hadn't been easy. It had been filled with twists and turns she never could have predicted. But it was a good life, a cherished life. If you enjoyed this story of love and redemption on the harsh frontier, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss another tale.